Okay. Thank you all for attending and welcome to the Advancing American Freedom webinar with Senator Todd Young. We are thrilled to have the senator with us today. He is many of you will know him. Senator Todd Young is a great advocate for conservatism in the United States Senate and common sense in the United States Senate, and has really carved out a niche as an up and comer on all the issues that we work so hard on here at Advancing American Freedom. Today, as you all know, the issue that we're going to be focusing on is taxes. And the Senate finds itself right now in the midst of an effort to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill, and to ensure that the tax cuts that were put in place in 2017 remain permanent. And Senator Young came to the Senate in 2017, was a critical part of passing that TCJA in the first Trump-Pence administration. And he can help us understand firsthand what some of the dynamic issues are that are at play. As you all know, our great supporters on this call from across the country, AAF has been leading on this issue. We announced last year a $10 million campaign that was going into the election, where we were able to play in key Senate races across the country on behalf of senators who would come to Washington and then would vote to extend and make permanent these tax cuts. We were proud that 3 of the 4 races that we engaged in were victories, and we replenished the ranks of conservatives who are fighting to keep taxes low in the Senate. We also continue that effort to this day. We were thrilled to see the bill come out of the House. We noticed that when the bill came out of the House, there were efforts by left-wing progressive organizations to attack members of Congress who voted for this bill. We went into key House districts after that to combat that effort and are running digital advertisements and grassroots campaigns thanking those members of Congress in those key districts for their support. And by the way, they're going to have to do it again. They're going to have to do it one more time, right? So we got to get this thing through the Senate and then across the finish line in the House. So enough from me. I'd like to turn it over to Senator Young, who many of you know is on the Senate Finance Committee, has been an integral part in crafting this, and working hard to ensure that our tax cuts are made permanent. Senator Young, if you could just off the top here, just kind of give an opening overview of where you think the state of play is in the Senate right now. What are the prospects? What are some sticking points? And how can conservatives continue to help you in your effort to ensure that this bill gets across the finish line?
Well, thanks so much, Tim, and certainly thank you to Vice President Pence, the entire Pence family, who've been friends for a lot of years. I'm so grateful for this invitation to speak with you. Today is a notable day when it comes to passage of One Big Beautiful Bill. We had some interruptions, to put it somewhat mildly, this morning, which I will get into momentarily. But I thought I would zoom out just briefly and talk about this process. I'm not going to assume that everyone understands or is deeply immersed in reconciliation.
Right.
The reconciliation process is a longstanding legislative process designed to reconcile our tax and our spending policies every time there's updated government budgets. And over time, however, human beings being human beings, we legislators have sort of exploited that tool to pass legislation through the reconciliation process that is still regarded as budgetary in nature, but makes much more meaningful changes to our tax and spending policies. The Democrats in recent years, will recall, passed the so-called Inflation Reduction Act through this process, and Republicans are attempting to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, in order to get your provisions passed, each of the provisions in a reconciliation bill needs to undergo something called a bird bath. And named after former Senator Robert Byrd of West Virginia, there are Byrd rules overseen by our Senate parliamentarian. The parliamentarian will determine, this is not an elected individual, they will determine whether or not something is regarded as primarily budgetary and therefore can be included in the reconciliation bill. This morning, the parliamentarian determined that the Medicaid efforts here in the U.S. Senate, which are designed to shore up the program and extend the service life of that program, are not allowable. So we are in the process of redrafting some of those provisions so that we can realize savings from waste, fraud, and abuse within the Medicaid program, make it more sustainable while passing the very important tax provisions of this legislation. I think we will have this resolved. I've been assured by leadership that there's a very high probability they can tweak the language and have our parliamentarians say it meets the bird bath requirements, and therefore believe we will satisfy the July 4th timeline that both the president and Republican members of Congress are working towards.
Well, that's great to hear, and that's news right here, folks. This is obviously important. We watched what happened in the House. We really view this bill as there are two components here. There's the first and most critical component of this bill is ensuring that taxes remain low on the American people. That's the number one priority. But then, as we all know, as conservatives, when you have these opportunities to pass a piece of legislation through the reconciliation process that Senator Young just described, and that's a 51 vote threshold in the Senate. And so you only get a couple bites at that apple, per Congress. And so you want to take advantage of that. And what House conservatives did was pushed very hard to include spending cuts in this bill, because we also know that key to the prosperity of the future of this country is not just keeping taxes low, but fixing our deficit and our debt. And so those wins that were secured by House conservatives were valuable wins, and we applaud those wins. And what Senator Young is describing is a problem that they're encountering in terms of the parliamentary structure in the Senate and how they're going to fix it. So I'm encouraged to hear that, Senator Young. We do think it's important to do both, and to really take meaningful steps at spending cuts in this bill and get as much as we can. So thank you for that. So you mentioned that you think this can be done by July 4th. Does that mean it's out of the Senate by July 4th, or do you think this is on the president's desk?
I don't have great visibility into the House and how the speaker is seeing votes line up. But my hope would be to get it on the president's desk by July 4th. That would require streamlining this bill through the U.S. House. I know that John Thune, our majority leader here in the Senate, has been consulting at every turn, not only with the White House, but also with Speaker Johnson as we make changes to the House bill, try and move it to the right as it relates to spending provisions, but also some of the tax provisions that don't stimulate growth much. And I think that will be helpful in meeting the July 4th deadline and getting things to the president's desk. I can say with a little bit more confidence, although we have to hedge our bets right now because the parliamentarian ultimately is in command of what can go in and what cannot. But I can say with a higher level of confidence that we'll get things out of the Senate by July 4th. That's everyone's objective. And, I think it's a helpful to have a deadline. And so the president was right to establish a deadline, to have that deadline taken seriously. John Thune and Speaker Johnson have done the right thing in trying to hit that deadline. This has been an ambitious time frame, though, to put it very mildly. And we still have plenty of time should there be some wrinkles to work out between the July 4th deadline and, say, August recess, if absolutely necessary. Right. Now, to be clear, I'm not hearing members of leadership talk about that. We're still focused on the deadline, but I wanted to contextualize what we're working towards here. And I'll say, listen, we're all focused by the implications of this, the substantive implications. In the state of Indiana, for example, I mean, we're talking about a real hit to working Americans, to working families, if we don't get this done. A $2,000 on average tax hit to the average Hoosier family, and we just cannot sustain that. Hoosiers don't want to sustain that. They deserve better than that, and we need to reauthorize and improve upon the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. If we fail in this effort ultimately, and we will not, then we see both politically and substantively the implications of doing so. So that's focusing everyone's minds on making principled compromises.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. I was going to ask you about that. And folks who are on the call, please don't hesitate. Click the Q&A button down at the bottom and put your questions in the queue, and I'll get to them in order. So say a little bit more about that, Senator Young. If we fail to do this, you mentioned the $2,000 tax increase on Hoosiers and Americans across this country. What does that do to the economy? What's the economy look like? And, I think we can extrapolate from that. If the economy takes a hit, then, it makes it harder for us going into these midterms and then, even into future elections. But talk a little bit about the economic impact, beyond the $2,000, hit to every pocketbook in this country.
Sure. Well, let me unpack this or unpack this rather. Those $2,000 are spent in the economy. Some of it will be saved, no doubt, and that saved money will then be used to finance all sorts of growth improving enhancements in the economy, from capital equipment to education and training. But most of that money will be spent in the consumer economy, and that circulation of money throughout the economy helps us grow. And regular families are the ones who are most inclined to circulate the money that comes in. So $2,000 will be a real catalyst for near-term and medium-term growth. We have also included, I mentioned we're improving on the 2017 tax legislation. So we've included certain enhancements and new tax incentives that are pro-worker and pro-family. So all of that money, like an enhanced child tax credit, for example, will be circulating throughout the economy and helping sustain our rate of growth. And then perhaps the most growth enhancing provisions, interest deductibility, bonus depreciation, where you can immediately write off capital expenditure, research and development, something I've been leading the charge on for years in our tax code. All of those things would be made permanent. So you'd actually have to have Democrats affirmatively voting to eliminate those provisions in the future, 10 years from now, after this package passes, for them to go away. All of that provides great certainty to our business investors and will help sustain economic growth. So that's why this is so important. It's not an abstract issue. It's really going to impact how much money regular people and regular business people have to spend and where they spend it.
Absolutely. We've got questions rolling in here from all over the place. So let me try to get to some of these, and I'll just take them in the order that they've come in. Question one, and you just kind of referred to this a little bit, Senator, but maybe there's a little more you want to expound on. Are there dynamics that you see that are the repeats from the 2017 TCJA? But what are the biggest differences?
Yeah, I would say the most meaningful difference from an overall economic growth standpoint and an American competitiveness standpoint is the permanency of these growth enhancing provisions. Yeah. So that is interest deductibility, bonus depreciation, and research and development. On one hand, I'm actually for basic research and national security relevant research areas. I think government has an important role to play there, but we can't, on one hand, invest in some of those public research areas while starving our private economy of continued incentives to invest in these research areas that will literally define the 21st century economy and our national security posture.
Right.
Because our military men and women depend on this research. So that to me is the most important difference. I would say what I will hear from my constituents, the child tax credit provisions are important. They're pro-family.
Yep.
We're going to receive some favorable responses from those. And the very proven low-income housing program, which enables working Americans of modest means to live near where the jobs are so that we have a functioning labor market.
Yep.
We've made certain enhancements in the legislation there to help with some of our housing challenges at that workforce level, and so those are also meaningful.
Solid improvements.
Yeah.
That you just touched on this a little bit as well, but I'd like to just put a point on this. So the question is, you've been a leader on R&D in the U.S. for a long time. And the question is about will Section 174 be made permanent? So, there's a little bit of what's the budget implications of this and whatnot. But the questioner says it's really important for economic growth that the expensing treatment for R&D be made permanent. So
yes,
where
I
does
agree.
that stand?
So it will be made permanent. There seems to be, if not universal, near universal agreement between House and Senate Republicans on the importance of this. It was not made permanent in the House, but I've been asked privately by members of the Ways and Means Committee and other prominent members of the House to press for permanency. They were under a sort of a time gun to send us a package so that we could improve it. Because members of the House and Senate alike recognize there's nothing we can do that is more growth stimulating than this on a longer term basis. And they also recognize, back to the national security implications. Let me just lay this out for unlike the questioner, people who don't spend a lot of time thinking about R&D tax provisions. If you were to invest $100 in China right now in research and development as a business person, that $100 would receive a $200 write-off on your taxes. In the United States, it's roughly $10.
Whoa.
That is no way to run a country in which technology is going to define the future of your prosperity and your national security. So we got to get this fixed.
Yeah, that's critical. Thank you for bringing that up, and thank you for putting this in the context of our competition with China and ensuring that America continues to lead the world. That's a critical issue for us. And, I think too often we look at these things in their own boxes. Oh, this is tax policy, or, this is foreign policy. Thank you for putting that in front of the group today. Here's an interesting question. What's not in the bill that you wish were in the bill? And I think the way I would ask you to answer that is not to be critical of the bill. I think we understand what, these are hard pieces of legislation to put together, and where this is a balancing act, and what you're trying to do is critical, which is to keep tax cuts low. But maybe the way to ask that question is, we do get another bite at the apple, on reconciliation next year. Maybe, what are some things that we should be thinking about?
That's easy for me, Tim. And it's not in the tax realm. It's on the spending side.
Yep.
And let me clarify, because I didn't cover this before. In these reconciliation bills, the rules in the Senate which are sort of arcane. The House doesn't have to deal with reconciliation because there's no filibuster in the House. You don't have to overcome a 60 vote threshold to end debate and what have you. But here in the Senate, in order to ensure we can operate by just majority rules, 51 votes, you got to go through a reconciliation process. And the reconciliation process says, if you want to cut spending, it has to be on the mandatory side, which is where most of our spending is. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security are the biggest programs. But it can't be Social Security. Yeah. So you're really looking at Medicaid and Medicare. Okay? I think we should be looking at waste, fraud, and abuse, not only in the Medicaid program, but also in the Medicare program. We need to shore those programs up. They're not sustainable. And our senior citizens are dependent on those programs. So we have a fiduciary responsibility, even though I can expect Democrats would demagogue this, and members of the mainstream media would help them. Got to lean into this. This is why we were elected. So
Yes, of course.
that's the first thing I do. Yeah,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
that's right. I mean,
And
remember
then the
we
second
yeah,
thing I would
keep going.
do is we have a habit, Republicans and Democrats alike do this, of making sometimes unrealistic growth assumptions about future growth and therefore future revenue effects of our
Yes.
reforms. I think we've actually done a pretty good job in terms of our estimates on this one, but I'm a small c conservative. We show a measure of humility,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And so what I would do is after a number of years, say 5 years or what have you, I'd put a trigger in place. I'd check our work and say if the revenue estimates aren't what we thought they were going to be, there will be more spending cuts.
Yeah.
Or if they exceed, maybe we can give some money back to different things. So I would
I
like
love
to
that
do
idea.
that. Both of those were unfortunately rejected. I've made my arguments throughout the process, but if we envisage a second bill, I'll continue to carry those principles into the conversation.
I love that idea, and we'd love to help as we get towards that. You know, you're so right on just the simple waste, fraud, and abuse in the Medicaid program. The number that we look at is around 1.5 trillion over 10 years, and just waste, fraud, and abuse. I mean, this is real money, right? And there are all sorts of people on the Medicaid program that really probably shouldn't be on the Medicaid program.
Yeah, and Tim, I mean, if the real budgetary challenge, if our long-term objective is to make sure we stabilize and over a period of time bring down the debt as a proportion of our economy, which is what all the economists tell us we should do, we got to figure out how to juice more growth out of our economy. We're going to do some of that here in the next few years, but we also need to figure out how to reduce the debt and so all of this would work in that direction. Please go ahead. Sorry.
Sir. Yes, sir. And I recognize we're running out of time here, so I'm going to just try to get through this last one or two. Question: what are Democrats up to, and how has that affected the Republican conference strategy?
Democrats are mostly irrelevant unless we allow them to dominate the public narrative, working with members of the mainstream media. So we need to continue to make the arguments about conservative policies and conservative principles so that Democrats don't fill the media vacuum, mischaracterize what we're attempting to do, and lay the predicate for undoing it once we get to the midterm elections and beyond.
Question here about the questioner says there has been some talk on the right about the need to raise taxes on the highest earners, and you've heard that in some of the more online circles. My impression, and I wonder if you agree with this, is that there's not a lot of purchase for that in actual elected office in the Senate.
You're correct.
Good. Good. It's something we fought very hard against, and it's a trend that's online right now, and worrying to see. But until they have real purchase with members of Congress, I think that's I think we got to make sure that doesn't happen. Final question here. So this is back to the spending cut issue. When are the other, you answered this a little bit already, but when are other opportunities in this Congress to deal with the spending issue that are real? Do we have other opportunities that are real? And can people be content with the level of spending cuts in this bill, knowing that we've got other chances?
No, they should not be content. In fact, they should continue to advocate through advancing American freedom, by calling their members of Congress and United States senators and visiting with them and persuading in whatever way they can that this is great. You made some meaningful first steps in this reconciliation bill, but your work is not done. There are plenty of not even hard decisions, frankly, obvious decisions that need to be made. This is why we're sending conservatives to Congress is to make these decisions, especially when we have control of the White House, the Senate, and the House, right? I mean, we have to assume we won't have this opportunity a couple of years hence. So I am pressing for more reconciliation bills. We can do more than one a year. We just recently learned that. So let's do more. Let's
Yeah.
go back. Let's work on Medicare waste, fraud, and abuse. Let's go back and let's figure out how we can coax more growth out of our economy, and that brings more revenue in while improving lives at the same time. So I think there's a lot more work to be done, and that's perhaps the most important takeaway. Listen, the most recent Social Security trustees report indicated that the program is less solvent than even the prior year's report, and that was in part, candidly, folks. I'm a great Republican. That was in part because there was a bipartisan effort to spend more money on Social Security as we approached Christmas time last year. I didn't participate in that effort, and I understand it can be hard to vote against these things when they come to the floor, but we really need to up our game on some of this mandatory spending reform. Otherwise, those who really need these programs aren't going to be able to receive the full benefits promised.
So finally, Senator, and then we'll let you go. And thank you so much for your time. Just tell folks on the call, people on this call are supporting AAF. They're out there in their communities working hard. What else can they be doing to help you guys get this right, both on the issue of spending cuts and on the issue of keeping taxes low?
Well, I mean, I know this is an incredibly thoughtful group, very plugged in. I mean, you're watching an advancing American freedom event, and so you know how to influence policymakers. Probably so many of you have personal relationships with your United States senators and members of Congress. Encourage them. Encourage them towards these fiscally responsible, growth-friendly directions. It means a lot. It means a lot psychologically to us as we're taking fire in the media to know that our troops are with us, and hold us accountable. I would say that that's important as well. Good friends, members of your family, and others need to do this from time to time. So hold them accountable. Continue to support organizations like Advancing American Freedom, as they make efforts to serve as force multipliers for all of your good efforts in your communities and in your states as well.
Senator, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your leadership and your courage. We'll continue to do everything we can to support you and your efforts in this. And we're rooting for y'all to get this done. And we'll check back in at a future date. So, and thank you all for being on the call today and for your support for AAF. And please follow Senator Young's advice and stay engaged. So thank you, Senator. Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks so much, Tim. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. I appreciate it.